Welcome back, everybody, to the Americans for Truth Hour. We're excited that you're listening. If you're listening live, this is Saturday night, 11 o'clock Central Time, so you are a dedicated culture warrior. And we have our last part. The sad news is it's our part 4 and final installment of our interview with Judith Reisman. And the problem with interviewing Judith, she's so interesting. She's got so much information crammed in just one of her books. There's a lot of questions I'm gonna want to have asked her, and by the time this is over, I won't have asked them. So, Judith, welcome back, and thank you for agreeing to this interview.
I'm delighted always to chat with you, my friend.
Yes, you are a great American. I know that Hannity has made that a cliche now, the great American, but you are truly a treasure for this country because you are a truth teller. Judith is the author of many books. How many books have you written again, Judith?
Well, depending on how you count, 5.
Okay.
So.
You've got some books that never quite got to the final book stage. I know that, and I wanted to talk to you about your research project on gay male relationships, and maybe we can get into that. But her most recent book is Sexual Sabotage. The one I've been studying for this interview is Kinsey, Crimes and Consequences, which is excellent, Judith. It's just crammed with information. And Judith's website is drjudithreisman.com. That's Dr. Judith Reisman. That's REISMAN.com. And it's got all her articles, links to them. And Judith, congratulations. You are now the visiting professor of law at Liberty University School of Law.
Yes. I think that's very wonderful. I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to having an opportunity to work more on amicus briefs at Liberty University Law School and doing some teaching, very much needed in terms of forensic human sexuality. Got to kind of get people out there understanding of our history and of the reality of the human sexuality frauds that have been perpetrated. Yeah.
Yes.
Looking forward to it.
And, Judith, I wanted to start by getting your reaction to the gay marriage vote in New York. We saw a Republican-dominated, controlled Senate in New York voted to pass same-sex marriage. Now, the first question I have for you, Judith, is what is, as a person, as a conservative, biblical-based moralist, what is your opinion? What do you think about so-called same-sex marriage?
Well, Peter, as you know, my argument for years has been that the data sustain very clearly early sexual abuse as a foundational component of homosexual conduct, okay? Now, that we've had so much recruitment in the schools is exacerbating that, but the fact that early sex abuse, in my view, which has destroyed the lives of homosexuals, really, has become a political tool to destroy even more lives is a very serious problem. And the research I did with a statistician, Dr. Charles Johnson, way back, which looked at The Advocate, which was the premier homosexual magazine at the time, this was a completely objective, or as objective as anything could be, using their own data, analysis of homosexual desires and so forth. And marriage was never in the cards, because it's not part of the homosexual lifestyle. It simply isn't. And the fact that this has been perpetuated, we're talking average 100 and some partners, as we are not talking about any kind of long-term relationships, and that's based on homosexual research and homosexual researchers themselves, which I quote extensively. It's not part of that lifestyle. It simply isn't, and it never was, and it never will be historically.
So does that mean that same-sex so-called marriage will end up doing more to change marriage than it will to change homosexual people in homosexual relationships?
Well, yeah. I mean, you're not going to cause the homosexual lifestyle to alter. This is a high drug-consuming, alcohol-consuming culture with multiple partners. That's part of the ambiance, if you will, of the experience. That's why when you go to homosexual parades, so many guys are half naked and women are, naked and half naked and running around dressed as sadomasochists. I mean, that's not what you see when the Catholic Church is marching for St. Patrick's Day. People don't get stripped and run around with whips and so forth. So the homosexual movement has made itself very, very clear. But as optimists, Americans are always optimists. Nobody wants to believe what they see. They don't want to believe what they read. They don't want to believe what they see. And yes, of course, the media has shut down access to the information, but still, it's very, very difficult to get past the bias that has now been established by mass media. Glee, this teenage show, has these two young boys passionately kissing. I love you, Tommy. I love you, Johnny. And, people's hearts go out to people who appear to be suffering. Well, the fact is that, and I think I mentioned this before, one of my biggest complaints, of course, is that we really are looking at long-term seduction of boys and girls by lesbians, less so, but certainly boys by a subculture within the homosexual movement that nobody does anything about. And we're looking at thousands of people dying of AIDS because they have been sexually assaulted, in effect murdered, by adult males who had sex with them. And the data that are very clear, and our quotes from the homosexual movement are clear, that this is something that's understood within the homosexual movement and is participated in. We did an analysis of the Queen's Vernacular, the homosexual dictionary.
No, that's a bunch of slang terms that are used and were used in the homosexual subculture.
And are used.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question about that. It was republished as gay talk, and an analysis of that dictionary identified the highest number of words were for sex with boys. Now, what dictionary is that? They're talking about chicken and butchered chicken and head over heels.
What's the definition for chicken?
Oh, it's a boy. I have it in the documentation from the dictionary, and that's a boy underage, new to who has not experienced homosexual experiences, that sort of thing, and who is then seduced and recruited into it. I mean, there's not any argument within the homosexual community, within the homosexual movement. They know what they're standing for. And we optimistic, naive Americans, just can't believe that can be true of Tom, who we know across the street, and he seems so nice. And he probably is. But you're talking about damaged folks who've experienced very heartbreaking backgrounds for the most part, and this was fully understood until our friend Kinsey came on board to say it's all natural and normal, and now we're seducing more and more people into lives that destroy them and then help destroy the society. Yeah,
Judith, it's really amazing the stuff that's not reported in the mainstream media. I got a copy of the Village Voice, which is the liberal newspaper in New York area. Has every year it comes out with its gay pride issue. It's called the Queer issue in 2011, and there's the Village Voice with its so-called queer issue, and on page 16 of it is a headline: Generation HIV. Young gay men, gay men at risk. There's one group that is seeing HIV rates accelerating, 20-something gay men. And let me just read you the first paragraph, Judith. 3 decades ago, the sexual revolution skidded to a halt. Today, young gay and bisexual men, especially men of color, account for the most alarming surges in new HIV diagnoses and represent the only demographic group whose rates of infection have continued to climb each year since antiretroviral drug therapies introduced in the mid-'90s gave patients hope. The highest rate... I
have to tell you, please let me interrupt you. People have to go to my website and see the article. I was just looking at it, actually, on the pink swastika as Holocaust revisionist history, the pink swastika as Holocaust revisionist history, because what you're really looking at here, and I'll talk to you about that in just a second in terms of the Jewish thing and what happened in Nazi Germany. But these aren't young gay men. These are boys who were raped by adult males. That's statutory rape. They die. They get AIDS. And what happens? They blame the boys and call them gay. She says no, but she means yes. It's all just reinvented, only it's reinvented for the dying young boys who then get why? Because, and I've documented this in numerous places, the drive after AIDS was exposed, the drive by adult homosexuals to say we have to do something about the young boys and girls who are no longer wanting to associate with homosexuals because they fear AIDS. We've got to get close to them, get into the schools and so forth.
Yeah, and Judith, you wonder how does it? It says the age group of 13 to 29. How does somebody 13 get HIV?
That means he was raped when he was about 9.
Right. We're talking to Judith Reisman. Her website is drjudithreisman.com. That's REISMAN.com. Our website is americansfortruth.org. Americansfortruth.org. We'll be right back with Judith after the break. Welcome back, everybody. This is the Americans for Truth Hour. I'm Pete LaBarbera, president of Americans for Truth. We are an organization, our full name, Americans for Truth, about homosexuality. We are a single-issue organization devoted to opposing and exposing the powerful homosexual activist movement, which just through a massive lobby effort, abated mainly by the Democrats, but also by some Republicans, including some wealthy neocons, Judith, pushed same-sex marriage through. And I just wanted to ask you, could you ever have foreseen that it would come this fast, Judith, that you would actually see in the year 2011 a legislature voting in so-called same-sex marriage?
I think the huge publicity blitz by the mass media, as well as bribery and blackmail. Please understand blackmail, very important. It isn't just Barney Frank, with all of his secrets in his basement and all that sort of thing, but anybody else that you can catch doing all sorts of surreptitious sexual things can get blackmailed. And as our society becomes more and more corrupt, you can pretty much nail almost any politician. So we've got a lot of people hopping on the bandwagon. And then a lot of people who want to be invited to the parties and don't want to be called homophobes and that sort of thing.
And bigots.
But I want to go back to where you were in terms of that 13-year-old. Okay.
The 13-year-old who contracts HIV.
Yeah. So you're really looking at mass rape of boys. That's what it is. Mass rape of boys. And I told you before that I think I did, that the Department of Justice research, 64% of forcible sodomy victims have been identified as boys under age 12. Now, come on, guys. Who do you think is raping these boys, and who's being arrested for that? And yet we're going to say that we're going to force marriage, quote unquote, all over the country, and we're going to penalize Christians or Jews who dare say that this isn't the same as being a black or a sexual minority. Give me a break. So you're really dealing with a massive propaganda campaign, which always brings me back to Hitler Germany, because we know now, of course, that Hitler himself was homosexual. Finally, that came out, and we've known all along that so many, if not the majority of his followers, were either bisexual and or homosexual. And the co-opting of the Holocaust by the homosexual movement actually is what got me involved in this whole thing. Well, that and one other thing in the first place. By saying that homosexuals are being victimized by the Nazis, just like the Jews, and that was always ridiculous. Anyone sits down and reads Mein Kampf, which is the story that, Hitler's statement about who he hates and who he wants to get rid of. You look in vain for a word about inverts or homosexuality or anything else in that statement, and you will not find it unless an editor has a little comment at the bottom. But you will find hundreds. I tallied them at one point, and it was 280. I don't remember how many, maybe it was more. References to Jews as parasites and that sort of thing. References to Christians as bad guys, Asians, blacks. But you're certainly not going to find anything going against homosexuals, because Hitler absolutely never disfavored macho homosexuals, just commie homosexuals and feminine homosexuals, as Scott Lively and Kevin Abrams pointed out in their book, The Pig Swastika.
Interesting. And certainly there was, Weimar Republic, there was a lot of cultural resentment towards the sort of anything goes sexuality that was happening. So you're saying that there was, in Mein Kampf had no critique, no references to homosexuality.
Oh, no, there's nothing that says this is bad.
Yeah, and he was discovered. He was discovered by a homosexual, Ernst Röhm. I just remember reading that from one of Scott's books, that Hitler himself was discovered by a flagrant homosexual pervert, Ernst Röhm, which is
into place by Ernst Röhm. He was put into place by the brown shirts, which were the bully boys. That's another issue in terms of homosexuality. Very strong bullying, and that's cross-culturally and historically strong bullying.
You're saying by homosexuals.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, major bullies. And that's
and I think it continues.
Wait a minute, I want to say that. It's to be understood that any massive group of males who are not being constrained and humanized by females will be bullies. They will be tyrants, and that is exactly what you see with the male homosexual movement, and lesbians increasingly so.
Yeah, and this bullying aspect really needs to come out. I'm amazed now to see Dan Savage, the homosexual. He's really a twisted fellow. He's risen now to the top of the homosexual activist chain there. He's more and more being featured as one of the representatives. This is a guy who's a total cultural bully. He infamously tried to give Gary Bauer a cold. He created Santorum.com and redefined Senator Rick Santorum's last name as the byproduct of anal sex. I mean, this guy is creepy evil, and yet he is, because the media never wants to criticize homosexuality, or God forbid they actually push gay activists like him outside the box, so he's not allowed in to this cultural debate. But instead, Judith, he's featured as one of their heroes now.
Well, just remember that, NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association, led by Harry Hay, walked with the homosexual movement all along. And I attended a big homosexual march way back in Wisconsin some years ago when Dahmer, what's his name?
Jeffrey Dahmer.
Jeffrey Dahmer. Yeah. I was standing there when Jeffrey Dahmer, I saw it on TV later, and I said, my gosh, that's the guy. I was standing there when Jeffrey Dahmer, who was raping and murdering little boys, that he picked up through the homosexual connections that he had. I was standing there when Jeffrey Dahmer, with half naked, with his little, Gestapo clothing, not clothing, but the straps across the chest and the black boots and that sort of thing. When he came, and that's another thing that's very common, is that cowboys were Nazis, the Luftwaffe caps and all that stuff. When he came marching toward us with a whip and that kind of business, and I thought, what a wacko. And so nobody talks about where these boys are getting picked up, how they're getting statutory rape, how they are dying, and everybody is weeping for the guys who are doing it to them. Now, I have a real problem with that because my whole background is in child sexual abuse and the defense of children. And it seems as though the only children we're willing to defend are little girls who might be raped by adult men, but not little boys, not young boys who are raped by adult men.
Yeah, and Judith, let's switch over because I've got so many questions for you, and we've only got this show to do them. You talk about how Kinsey wanted to change our nation was rooted in biblical common law, and Kinsey wanted to get rid of that. You wrote in your book, Kinsey Crimes and Consequences, you said, in 1989, none less than the National Research Council wrote of America as the pre-Kinsey and post-Kinsey eras, just as America's founders inscribed these biblical laws into the fabric of the new nation. It was against these fixed American common law principles that Kinsey, his team, and his legal colleagues labored and intrigued. quote, the fixed American common law foundation was fundamentally problematic for Kinsey and his colleagues. Talk about that.
Oh, that's pretty good. Oh, I like that.
Yeah, you have a lot of jewels in here. This is, folks. This is a book to be studied. I know, we always rave about our guests, but Judith, you got to get this book, Kinsey: Crimes and Consequences, because I guarantee you, no matter how much you think you know about America, the sexual ed movement, the whole sexual revolution, you'll realize how much you don't know when you read this book. So we talk about what we used to have a common law, a fixed moral principle as the basis for our laws.
Yeah. You see, you can't change laws. I realized this as I was trying to understand what had happened to our rape laws, okay? And I picked up an article by Susan Estrich, who was a very liberal, Dukakis gal.
Feminist.
And she, yeah, right, And she, in the middle of her article for Harvard Law Review, as I recall, she said, well, gee whiz, I just don't understand this. She says, the laws before Kinsey, that is before 1948, when it was restrictive and everything, those laws were tougher on rapists than the laws have been since our liberal guys have gotten into power. And she couldn't understand how that happened, And so I started researching the rape laws, and lo and behold, what happened was that after Kinsey it was used in every state and by every state legislature and then by judges and so forth to gut the common law. Then all of the laws that were protecting women and children got gutted. And how does that happen? Well, you can't change laws in a culture, at least you couldn't, unless you had a better body of research, a better source, to change it with, a better reference. Well, we had the common law, which is built on biblical law, right? So what happened was Kinsey stepped into this place and he said, no. The common law, which is based on biblical law, it really doesn't work here in the United States because I've done the scientific research. I have found that adultery is harmless. Yet the Bible says it's harmful. I have found that sex between adults and children is harmless, but the Bible says you can't do that sort of thing. I have found that that rape doesn't really cause any trauma, but the Bible says, you can't go around raping people and get away with it, and the laws were based upon that. So, we shifted from what was called the common law, the biblical law, the Judeo-Christian law, to what would then be called the scientific law, the sex scientific law. And from there, we got Kinsey claiming that 10 to 37% of the population is homosexual, so sodomy is harmless, that adultery is harmless, because he said, because he said 87% of our single women who had abortions, that was harmless, and he said that abortion was harmless, 27% of our married women were having abortions. So there are all sorts of lies that gutted our laws and turned our nation into where we are right now.
Well, yeah, and this is so crucial, Judith, because most Americans, I guarantee it, would have no idea that there were much stronger penalties. Most people have grown up in this liberal system, which was so influenced by this guy Kinsey, held up as an authority, even though he was a sadomasochistic, perverted pedophile, as you called him in our last interview. We'll be right back with Judith Reisman after the break. Welcome back, everybody. We're in the part 4 of a 4-part interview with Dr. Judith Reisman, who has just been appointed as the visiting professor of law at Liberty University School of Law. That's the place where there's some real terrific truth tellers. Professor Rena Lindevaldsen, Matt Barber is over there. This is, of course, All Liberty, which has Matt Staver, who does such tremendous work. So they're really building a team over there, and I encourage you to get information about Liberty University School of Law. If you have a child who's interested in affecting the culture but doesn't want to get brainwashed by academia, because all of liberal academia teaches Kinsey, most of it, right, Judith?
Oh, yeah.
Kinsey is is the norm in legal studies, but as we've learned, Kinsey was about as far from normal as you could get. Now, Judith, you were talking about the common law. And what happened was Kinsey publishes this great study. Kinsey is revered by the what we would call now the liberal media of his time. And so he publishes this book, which just happens to have these data from child molesters. Oh boy, what an oversight! We in the media just didn't think that was worth exposing. So he publishes this book. He's featured everywhere. He's put on Time magazine. He is now the authority. They needed a new authority to get rid of the old authority, which was basically our common Judeo-Christian understanding. And so after all this happens...
So we got a sexual psychopath to become the new authority.
Yeah, a sexual psychopath who was a weirdo, twisted pervert from his boyhood. That's another thing we just didn't think was relevant. But anyways, he's the new authority. And so after this book comes out with there was a few Judith Reismans of their time trying to say, hey, wait a minute, hold off, don't hold this guy up. But they were, of course, overrun by the so-called mainstream media, right, Judith?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So their voice wasn't heard. Who were just a couple of those people who you look back to and say, wow, they were doing something at least? Who was one of those people?
Well, Trilling actually tried. He was very popular at the time. Even Maslow tried to repudiate. These were very, very well-known people. Kinsey was a nobody, really. He was made somebody because of the Rockefeller money that put him up into the front page of every newspaper. And remember, in 1917, the congressional report, already identified the fact that the mass media was being taken over by the moneyed forces, and they were going to be controlling the editors and everybody else. And so the newspapers, even at that point, were shifting gears and doing whatever the power players told them to do. And they wanted to support Kinsey, and they wanted to support these kinds of lies. They didn't want seduction. Remember, in 1948, seduction was against the law, and it was a felony in California. You couldn't whisper sweet nothings into some girl's ear. Well, that's because there was a whole different view of girls and girlhood than we have today. And so so the whole idea was to create a new legal system.
Okay, so let me talk about now, after the book came out, then they switched over and they're promoting this thing called the Model Penal Code. And I want to quote from, and get your comments, page 205 of your book, Kinsey, Crimes and Consequences, which is, by the way, available through WorldNet Daily, as is Judith's new book, Sexual Sabotage. WorldNet Daily Books, just go to WND.com, go to their bookstore, and you want to get this book. But you talk about the goals of the Model Penal Code. And let me just tick them off, and then let's talk about them. Number one, eliminate or trivialize common law that criminalized male violence towards women and children, statutory rape laws, seduction, homosexual rape, wife-child battery, incest, etc. Number two, eliminate or trivialize common laws that criminalized abuse of the institution of marriage. Oh, boy. Number three, eliminate or trivialize common laws. Again, we have the biblical-based common law leading to granting of child custody to immoral, unsafe persons. This is the change. They used to keep children away from immoral, unsafe people. Now they want to give them custody. And, of course, today we're seeing the granting of custody to open homosexual practitioners, which is just, to me, bizarre, to pretend that homosexuals are as good for children as people who practicing normal sexuality. That's weird. But number four, Judith, eliminate or trivialize obscenity, so pornography. So the penal code, now, was this largely successfully established? How many states? Did every state end up enacting the penal code? Every
single state in the union has adopted all or in part the model penal code that was created that's based on Kinsey. And the Lawrence decision, which normalized sodomy just in 2004, I think it was, or 2003, I forgot which, the Lawrence versus Texas decision actually cites for its justification 100% really to Kinsey, because it cites as its major source the 1955 Model Penal Code, which is 100% Kinsey on sodomy, and it cites to then the homosexual researchers who all cite Kinsey, because there's nobody else to cite to claim that this is a normal way of life. And in terms of obscenity, Kinsey was himself a pornography addict. He was forcing all the women that were married to his lover co-authors to perform, including his wife, for pornography. He himself, of course, is impotent, which is always going to happen to pornography users. Everybody out there, wake up and smell the coffee.
Well, not just pornography users. He was abusing himself, so that must have helped, right?
Well, yeah, that was definitely part of it. I mean, he brutalized himself, something unbelievable. And as we said just before, climbs into the bathtub and cuts himself to try and circumcise himself, because at that time, of course, that was definitely a more desirable image within the homosexual community, was uncircumcised guys. And so, he was found in the tub, bleeding all over the place. Yeah, we said he hung himself from his organs and, fell. I mean, this is a totally insane man.
What's so insane, Judith, is that, when somebody says, hey, I got a great new drug, and we try the drug out, and later it's learned through further research that the drug causes cancer or has these terrible side effects, the drug is taken off the shelf. But here we have the model penal code. All our laws changed, penalties reduced for rape. And then, hey, look, the guy who's behind all this turns out, well, he was consorting with pedophiles. He was a terrible self-abusing pervert and homosexual. All distorted research made it seem like adultery and homosexuality were more commonplace. But the laws were never changed. Those laws, they were just, they kept the laws even though they were based on this fraud.
Yeah, well, that's, of course, because we can't get it into public. The New York Times hasn't chosen to review my book, nor has any other mainstream, media vehicle, because they wouldn't dare. This would throw everything into a cocked hat. But we now have at least 4 new victims who've come forward. One of them being a man who was sold by his father to homosexuals, including to Kinsey, apparently, and who was sexually violated by Kinsey's team, and who recalls himself being engaged sexually with Kinsey in a way that Kinsey would have appreciated. And so we're putting together a group of people and starting to discuss the whole idea of a call out for any children, any adults who were born between the ages of 1938, which is when Kinsey started, and 1956 was when the conclusion of the research. Anyone within that space of time who feels that they were sexually abused by any of Kinsey and Kinsey's people to come forward, because we want to get those files at the Kinsey Institute open that they've locked to the public illegally, and anybody who feels that they have been so damaged has standing to come forward and say, we believe that those crimes may reflect us, may reflect me. There was cinema taken. They have the films at the Kinsey Institute, child pornography, and they have the records of a lot of the people who've been victimizing these children, and they continue to get these records even as we speak. So there's crime, massive crime. It's worse than Tuskegee. It's worse than the LSD experiments, because we're talking about roughly 2,035 children whose lives were they were tortured, their lives were ruined, and they were used as experimental subjects, guinea pigs, to change the laws in this nation.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, Indiana, politicians in Indiana, go for it. I mean, this Kinsey Institute should be hauled before a congressional committee. It should be investigated.
Or a grand jury. We'll take either one. So we're working on that right now, and take all the support we can get on it.
Well, now, Judith, we got 2 minutes to the break, and then we got the 9-minute segment, the last one. But talk about now, the practical effects now. Rape. What would have happened had a man raped an underage girl, say, back in the 40s versus a man, say, in a liberal state? Let's take Illinois or New York. A man rapes
back.
Yeah.
And we'll say that in 1948, when Kinsey's book came out, half the states in this country offered the death penalty for rape. And it didn't have to be rape of a child. It was just general all-around rape. And you didn't have to cut off somebody's arms and legs, as most, people think now. Rape was considered to be a horror. As a matter of fact, Theodore Roosevelt said that rape was worse than murder. It was kind of interesting. Good man. So that was the attitude of our people back then, even in 1948. So half the states would get the death penalty. It doesn't mean you'd really get killed, but it sure means you that's a pretty good scare, and you'd be locked up for a very long time. The rest of the states, pretty much except for one, would give life imprisonment. Now we're talking about, plea bargains and reducing rape to any number of mischievous events, right? And we're talking about giving maybe no time at all, getting out on parole, or 2 years, maybe 6, maybe. So we've gone from the death penalty to either nothing and parole or a few years and parole.
Well, I'll tell you what, anybody raped one of my daughters, and it would take everything within me not to engage in vigilante justice. I mean, it's just appalling, Judith. And, wow. We have one more segment with Judith Reisman. Her website is drjudithreisman.com. That's drjudithreisman.com. Our website is americansfortruth.org, where we will have the archives of these interviews. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody, to our last segment of Part 4 of our interview with Judith Reisman. And I know those of you who've listened to them all, you will have enjoyed them. Judith, it's great to have you, and I'm so glad that you will be at Liberty University School of Law. Judith, okay, now you said half the states had the death penalty for rape. I can't imagine a child molester getting off. What happened? Did they? I mean, well, first of all, was there much less of child molestation back in the 30s, the 40s? I mean, how much more is there now than there was? Yes.
No, of course there was less. There isn't even any issue there. You're talking about most kids coming from families with a mother and a father where they felt that it was their responsibility to oversee their children. You're talking about a society that made all sorts of drug consumption completely illegal, so nobody was sufficiently relaxed to do any bloody thing they felt like doing. It was a culture that even condemned alcohol, remember? Alcohol consumption. Right. Not that we didn't have those problems. Every society has problems, but that was very much under control. We had a much higher rate of church attendance, and there was serious church attendance to a greater or lesser extent. So yeah, of course, and kids, look, I grew up in those years. Kids could go out and, here's the answer. Nobody worried about their children going out to play. My mom and dad always used to say, go out and, sure, go have a good time, but be home in time for dinner, right? Be home before dark. Well, not because they were so much afraid of the dark and what would happen, but because you had to be there for dinner and get your homework done. So we've moved to a time when parents rightly walk even their semi-adult children practically, to the bus stop and stand with them. I've watched that. So people are worried to death about what will happen to their kids, and they worry for good reason. The laws have been completely gutted. Look, one of the reasons I went into all this, too, and got started on all this, and it's in the book, is my little daughter, when she was 10, gets raped by, I never thought of such things, by the juvenile lived above us, a 13-year-old boy. Well, it turns out he was sexually assaulting children all over the neighborhood. But the laws had changed enough so that the issue, as Ronald Reagan said, was to look after the predator and not the victim. And so nobody was telling anyone that this kid was a serial child rapist, right? Yeah. He was seeing therapists at the time. He was getting therapy, and it was completely acceptable not to tell anybody and to let this kid out on the street. And that's the same case now with adults. So is there more child abuse? Of course. Yes. Look at your pornography. I mean, look at the
And I want to, Judith, on the pornography,
5,200 guys downloading child pornography. It was 5,200 at the Pentagon that we know of, and nobody is really, they had, I think, 3 or 4 people get arrested, but what happened to the rest of them? So is there more child sexual? Of course there's more child sexual abuse. What do you think?
Yes. Well, that was, and I knew the answer, Judith. But, we haven't had time to get into all your work on pornography, but obviously the explosion of pornography. You mentioned that Hugh Hefner called himself Kinsley's pamphleteer, and it just exploded, and that genie is out of the bottle. It's hard to get controls on that now. The effect of pornography on crime and sex crimes, it's almost hard to quantify, isn't it, Judith?
Well, Yeah, I mean, you can't quantify it, and the reason you can't quantify it is because it's gotten so bad that the data had to be altered. I've written on that, the way on the rape laws, and that's on my website, on the reports on rape. Allegedly, we went through this real downslide in rape. Yeah, well, okay, yeah, if you read cast rape as mischievous adventure, or if you recast rape by simply losing all of the reports as they did in New York and I've forgotten the other states, it's in my report. And, then you can say that your rape rates are lowered. Well, how many thousands, I remember how many thousands of rape cases were simply put into a box somewhere in New York so that they could lower their rape rates. Well, why did they do that? They did that because you'd lose your job if you reported too much rape in your community. And you want the community not to be frightened, and so you say, no, things are so much better now. Right. Just like homicide. Is there more or is there less homicide? Well, of course there's more homicide, but the fact is that with the advances and Lieutenant Colonel Grossman has documented this in his books on teaching our children to kill. With the advancement in the ability to emergency vehicles to get to the site of a crime and the swift communication that we now have, pick up the cell phone. Yeah, you've had fewer homicides. I mean, fewer deaths from the attacks that were attempted to be homicides and the drive-by shootings and all that. Everybody knows things are worse. They won't go into neighborhoods. They won't let their children out on the streets. They hide in their houses and they watch TV dramas about how all the heroes are solving all our problems.
And now, Judith, you see the young. You talked about how you've got these, Chelsea's Law and all these laws, which are basically because of the things got so bad that there was just a populist movement now to make these crimes the punishments much stronger. But you say what few people realize is that all of this goes way back it traces back to Kinsey, why these young people are being victimized.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we said in my new book, Sexual Sabotage, I spent a lot of time on how the baby boomers became who the baby boomers are, although their parents were the greatest generation and saved the world from the Axis terrorists, right? So how did the greatest generation produce this sex, drugs, rock and roll people who then have evolved into this drug-consuming bunch that have turned into the, Generation X and Generation Porn and all that sort of thing? So I go through all that, and yes, look, Hugh Hefner was typical of your college students, even back as far as the late 1950s, 1960. He was a virgin. Most guys were virgins in college, as certainly girls were. And then he says he read Kinsey. This is him. He says he read Kinsey's book, and by golly, Kinsey showed him that everybody was doing all this sexual stuff. His parents were doing it, according to Kinsey, and so he said, wow, and all these years he has been denying himself, and he was going to go, and I'm quoting him over and over again, that he would be Kinsey's pamphleteer. He would popularize to the general public all of Kinsey's beliefs in terms of bestiality, in terms of homosexuality, in terms of no-fault divorce. Look, Hefner was on the board. He was the first guy out of the horse thingamajig, to push for no-fault divorce. He didn't want guys to have to pay alimony, and he fought for that. He, of course, was divorcing his wife. So yeah, we had virgins in the 1960s in our colleges, and one of the big statements about that virginity thing made by this couple that was very pro Kinsey, that wrote all the law stuff at the time, the Ensenbergers, I think they were called, or whatever.
Got a minute left, Judith. So summarize it up for us.
Oh, okay. All right. So the pornography revolution comes and the NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association, evolved straight right dab out of Kinsey, and that's what they all say. They testify to that. The pedophiles claim Kinsey hold Kinsey's research dear. It's he that we owe, to which, we owe him our success in society. And Hefner has said the same thing. So this massive revolution has come about because of this one deviant, wacko, sexual, psychopathic pedophile. We need some Americans to begin to understand that and to begin to apply that in terms of what they know about no-fault divorce and what they know about the way their laws were gutted. And get to my website, people. It's free.
Yeah, thank you so much, Judith. We appreciate you. And I do want people to get Judith's books. Her recent one is Sexual Sabotage. Go to drjudithreisman.com. That's drjudithreisman.com. You can also go to our website, americansfortruth.org, and get the past interviews. Thank you so much. God bless you.